Thanks for joining us again for another episode of The Soapbox here at UC Davis with the Students for One Health. Today, we have the honor of interviewing three members from our CVET program, which comes out of the One Health Institute here at Davis. Joining us today, we have Dr. Ashley Patterson, William Burke, and Scott Buhl. And so Dr. Ashley Patterson is the Associate Director of Operations at CVET. William Burke is the Associate Director of Planning on the other end. And then Scott Buhl is the Associate Director of Logistics. And so they basically lead the CVET operations. Dr. Ashley Patterson does operations during response and general preparedness planning, as well as content for training programs. Scott Buhl, he is the resource management during response, ensures that our volunteers and kind of mobile responders are ready and supplies are good to go. And then William Burke, he also does management and integration. He works with the emergency centers during responses and also planning efforts. And if you guys could just, in your own words, did we get pretty much most of your jobs or missed any important parts?
Nothing important, no.
Sounds great.
Many topics. And then briefly, if you guys don't know what CVET is, it's a really cool program. It stands for the California Veterinary Emergency Team. And they basically work with other state and county agencies during disasters, also before disasters, to kind of help plan their responses before disasters happen, but also during them. They also work to train, educate, and it's a very cool program, very important, especially now. But yeah, so we're excited to have you guys. And so we'll just start with a really brief icebreaker, kind of just a fun question.
Okay.
So if you had to pick any animal species that would be the best at planning for disasters and responding to disasters, what do you think? Who do you think it would be?
Planning for a disaster?
Yeah, like doing your job. Who do you think? What animal species would be the best?
What's your favorite species to work with, Dr. Patterson?
Well, but that's very different than who I think would be good at planning.
Who do you think's the easiest to work with, I guess?
For some reason, when you ask me about planning, I don't know why I think of birds somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah.
I like associating personalities with dog breeds, and
Okay.
I love this question. Never thought of it before.
Mm-hmm.
But immediately I'm drawn to beagles.
Oh, okay.
Because they are very trainable, but at the same time, like, bring a little bit of excitement to the party. So they keep the energy up, when people are tired, when the operations and logs people have had long days.
Yeah.
If we come back from the EOC freshly fed and we have to bring the energy, bring it up, I don't know. I'm feeling beagles.
You have a beagle on your team? Yeah, I can see that.
And I was recently converted during the Park Fire incident we responded to last summer. I think baby calves or baby cows.
Oh, okay.
We had one patient that came in that was on a bottle fed for a few days. Was a wonderful, wonderful patient and easy to work with. Fun. So
Nice. That's very cool. Very different answers. But I can see them all.
Very
I
different.
can see them all. So basically, first question, can you talk a little bit about what goes into your planning for an emergency response? Like, do you kind of come up with some like main goals that you go into whatever you're responding to with, and do they vary depending on the type of like emergency or disaster?
Sure. So my background, like you mentioned, is emergency management. So it's an emerging field, but a growing science into how do we best, most efficiently plan for disasters. And that starts with a concept known as all hazards planning. Essentially what it says is we're going to respond to any incident, and we're going to respond to any incident independent of what the actual emergency is.
Okay.
Meaning whether it's a wildfire or a flood or an earthquake, we're going to have a system in place that does the same thing no matter the incident. So in planning, you talk about like objectives, what you want to work on. Usually those are something around the idea of planning to provide an emergency service, in our case, veterinary care during disasters. And then you want to do so You want to provide that service in a structured system, and you want to do so keeping everyone safe. So no matter whether you're providing veterinary care or you're responding as a wildland wildfire fighter, you're going to respond, operating off of those. Also, is it live? Because I realize how nervous I am. I'm answering this.
It's not.
Okay. So you want to we want to plan for emergencies under the system of all hazards. So we want to structure our response, in our operations planning or our response planning, to be incident independent. So no matter the incident, we're going to be doing the same set of things.
Okay, that's really interesting. I don't know why in my head I was imagining that there would be kind of different things depending on what you're responding to.
Sure.
But I guess it makes sense that it's like a standard operations.
So you start with a standard set of plans, but
Yeah.
then, as you mentioned, there's these things called annexes when it comes to planning,
Okay.
or when we're responding. You may see with a fire, you're going to see more burn injuries, so
Right.
you can bring relevant equipment for that. Or a flood, you may see different, communicable diseases. No matter what you're responding to, towards the end, you can tailor your response and your
Right.
planning.
Yeah, what's nice is that the process stays consistent,
Mhm.
but you can adapt and evolve and kind of in the moment just select the resources you want to meet the objective. So
That's-
depending on the
yeah.
incident, we're still going to have the same process, but we may just bring, like Will said, different equipment. We may
Yeah.
mobilize different responders with different skill sets.
Okay.
These are things that we have available to us that we can kind of make those decisions on the fly as we go.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And then like how often do you run into issues once you get there and you kind of have to rework some of those plans, or is it to the point where communications and your network is so kind of streamlined that you don't usually run into issues once you get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you build in the opportunity to adapt. So
Right.
we have planning meetings every day. We're always planning both for the near future and the long-term future.
Mhm.
So you plan a structured set of response and systems, but at the same time, you're adapting. So what we do is we integrate kind of analyses to see where our response is at. Are we meeting the need? Is there an expanded need? Are operations growing, or are they winding down? And we can adjust from there. So it's a little bit of a constant game of checking in and adapting on the fly.
And I'd say one additional piece that's just consistent across all disasters is the communications coming in. As much work and preparedness goes into it,
Mhm.
there's always gaps
Right.
in understanding the full picture
Mhm.
and understanding all the specifics. And so you're going to have to understand that. We preach that a lot to our responders to understand. We even tell them the concept of the hurry up and wait. So we may mobilize the team, and we need to be on scene for a little while before we get our next kind of instructions of what's needed, and to where we start to gather some more information kind of from a local site assessment. But that information is rarely a complete package on day one and just hand it to us and we know exactly what to do. So we'll plan for a lot of different options and bring extra things and
Right.
know that we can kind of transition as needed.
That's pretty cool. Do you find, because I know I believe a few disasters that you guys responded to, I was seeing that like you guys were requested, like you guys were asked to come in. But do you guys wait to be asked, or do you offer your services ahead? How does that kind of work, just like bureaucracy wise? Because I know you work with like a lot of other, I guess like government agencies, departments. So how does that work?
Number two, yeah. So yeah, it's tricky because as soon as these disasters do occur, especially the big ones, they tend to get a lot of attention,
Right.
media and social media and everything, and everybody wants to help.
Right.
But unfortunately, when you show up with, even if it's you've got team and you've got responders and you've got equipment, if you're not asked to be there, oftentimes you showing up is just creating another problem now that they have to solve.
Right.
So it's one of our absolute mainstay rules. We have to be asked, and there has to be a formal request process in order for us to go.
Okay.
And that's simply one, to make sure that the resource is truly needed and that they're asking for that resource, but it also allows for the state to look at multiple incidents that are occurring at the same time. So if we're having multiple fires that are happening in California, where do you send the veterinary team to? Which one? Or
Right.
do you divide and conquer? But you need that overall picture and understanding of the level of severity of each of those incidents to make that decision. Otherwise, you could deploy an entire team all the way down to Southern California and have no one available to do something up here in the north. So, yeah.
No, that makes sense.
A challenge we have is outreach. So letting local communities know about this process and how to get a hold of us,
Right.
when is appropriate to ask for
Right.
veterinary services, and what that process would look like. if they should need it.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess on a different kind of scope of responding to disasters, in I had a couple like sociology classes in undergrad, and we talked a lot about, I guess, like community perception of disasters and the fact that, some people, um, I guess, don't view certain disasters as, I guess, scary and seriously as they should sometimes, and it depends on a lot of things. But I guess, how have you guys run into any differing community perceptions of disasters? Any difficulties actually like executing your plans because of that? Like people just maybe not taking it super seriously, or like responding, I guess, differently. Not wanting to leave. I don't know, things like that.
So specifically with our team, we haven't seen too much pushback or challenges
Yeah.
like you're getting at. But from an EM perspective, emergency management perspective, the way we kind of prioritize and try to quantify risk, we look at like really three main factors. How impactful is the threat going to be? How likely is the threat going to be? And then how prepared are we?
Okay.
So when you talk about impact, a wildfire can have significant impact on the community versus a foodborne illness, a disease outbreak, a foodborne outbreak may have really limited impact.
Right.
And then when you talk about likelihood, wildfires, again, repeatedly we see it increasing, if anything, here in California versus alien abduction, really unlikely. So you don't really need a plan for that.
Okay.
I do think, though, to your point, when you talk about communities that experience disasters and this planning process that goes into place to try to identify what those hazards are, I do think there's a different community perception to someone who their property burns every summer and they go through this every year and they stay at their house and it hasn't been a problem.
Yeah.
Getting that person to heed warnings is going to be a lot harder than someone who's never experienced it before. Similar for hurricanes, right? The hurricanes, multiple come through the same path, in over the year. So I do think there are some varying differences depending on the location and how frequent disasters occur in that area.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. And then I guess kind of going off of that, oftentimes I think we talk about it in school too. There's like barriers to actually, I guess, leaving or going through with a plan or evacuation. If you guys don't mind discussing kind of some of the barriers that you run into. Because here in California, we do see mainly fires, maybe some like earthquakes, things like that. But I guess what are some of the barriers that you guys run into, community members run into?
Yeah, I think some common barriers community members across the board run into. First off is language spoken.
Okay.
Right? We may make a presumption that English is the primary language spoken in California, but there's many other languages that need to be factored in and make sure that people are getting the information they need in an understandable and digestible format, that they understand the severity of the incident that's occurring. There's also accessibility. We also make a lot of assumptions that everyone has a smartphone and is going to get those alerts because they've signed up for that specific alert through their county. Many people have not. So we need to understand that some people will be getting advance warning through technology platforms and others won't. And so we need to think through that accessibility, making sure we're getting the information out in many different formats. And then kind of just on the veterinary side, I'll just speak to this because it's something interesting that I came over from a wildlife program and came over to see that a few years ago. And what's interesting I've learned is like with the evacuation, think about wildfires and evacuation. You think there's a lot of people out in the countryside who own large animals.
Right.
Do all of them have trailers to evacuate their own large animals if they had to evacuate their animals off the property? The answer is many do not. That is something that you need to be aware of because if you start to put in evacuation orders for an entire rural area and there's going to be thousands of animals that need to be evacuated, but only a handful of trailers, you have to think about that and help think of ways that you can assist those communities to actually get their animals out. This is where some of the community animal response teams that are local and that work hand in hand with the county animal services are great. This is a volunteer group that can go in with additional resources such as trailers and literally just help evacuate horses, goats, etc. So it's a good thing to think about. It's just that personal preparedness.
Yeah. And I guess then kind of looking at all our different species that we work with, I think a lot of times, wildlife also has like a major issue of being able to evacuate, and they find themselves obviously encroaching on then human, like people's homes, land. I think we saw that with the LA fires recently too. Yep. We saw a lot of wildlife kind of being pushed into human communities. So is that something that you guys also then work with in terms of interaction between wildlife, humans, wildlife, like livestock, domestic animal species?
Yeah. I think to be clear, the legislation that was passed in 2021 for CVET did not include the language of wildlife.
Okay.
But with that said, obviously the One Health Institute, there's numerous wildlife conservation and oil spill response programs. So our own director, Dr. Michael Zaccardi, has very close connections with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
So anytime there's wildlife in mentioned or incorporated in such as like a wildfire, we can immediately get the right people involved to assist with that, whether that's us supporting, but also get the right agencies involved to appropriately respond and help out the wildlife. I think in general, the challenge is wildlife are wild. They are left to their own to try to run away and evacuate themselves, right? In most cases. In oil spills, there's like an example where you may have like a threatened or endangered species that you go in and like do a preemptive capture and relocate, but it's hard to do sometimes in fast moving disasters where you don't have that time.
Right.
So really, we're hoping that they can skedaddle out of the way. Okay. With that said, though, you mentioned there's habitat fragmentation. There's this concept that wildlife corridors would be very useful even during disasters. So we talk about it for crossing over an interstate, such as the Mountain Line Project. The One Health Institute has been a big proponent of these wildlife corridors, so we can actually have these mountain lions be able to go and cross and not be isolated in genetic little mini pools. But it is really something that in disasters would be useful too. They need to have somewhere to go so they don't run into a large highway or into the fire itself. So they need to have avenues, ideally.
So do you, so you mentioned you work with the fish wildlife. And so what other groups do you guys commonly kind of work with to come with and help respond in terms of like the veterinary aspect and like treating? What other groups?
I mean, I think the majority of the groups that we work with are varying levels of nonprofit or non-governmental organizations, so a lot of volunteer organizations. There's a really strong grassroots effort in California of folks that have been around for years, have dealt with fire for years, and they've really organized themselves to do, as Scott's saying, to help with either evacuation or sheltering. Some of those teams have veterinarians on them, but oftentimes they are not serving as a veterinarian in that role. They're serving as an animal volunteer. So it's really nice to pair with them because they can do the evacuation and the sheltering, and then we can provide the veterinary care in coordination with them. I would say the other biggest partner for us would be the animal services or animal control entity. Yeah. And that's going to be different for every county. Sometimes it's a county Department of Animal Services. Sometimes it's a humane society, and they have been tasked with that responsibility. So it varies. But those are ultimately going to be the folks that have that authority over animals during those disasters, especially the ones that we don't identify their owners. So we work very closely with them as well.
And I would just mention too, like on a big picture too, to your earlier question about authority to respond, is we have MOU partners, memorandum of understanding with state partners such as the California Department of Food and Agriculture and California Office of Emergency Services. Yeah. So those are at a high level. We went ahead and pre-worked out all the arrangements of our kind of mobilization and how we were going to operate in the space, so that we're all on the same page during these large scale incidents. So there's no surprise when we show up.
And so I guess just thinking about the future and where I guess environmentally we are kind of headed, just with warmer weather, climate change, is that something that you guys kind of think about in terms of planning for the future, just anticipating more different types, different intensities? How do you guys kind of work that into what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, the message has been pretty well received that disasters and, with things changing over time, the frequency and intensity of disasters is just increasing. We've got evidence of that from a variety of sources. So from our perspective, it's really just getting the message out there to say, this is something that you think might not happen to you, but the chances of it happening to you are just getting higher and higher and higher. Right. So what can we do to take those preventative measures, those preparedness measures, to try and keep you and your family safe, or you and your community safe? And really just trying to educate folks when we're doing outreach and working with our partners to say that this is a reality that we just need to know is going to be something for a while in the future, I would imagine.
Yeah. So basically just outreach at the moment, education, trying to stress
the importance of it. Okay. Yeah. And I often equate the preparedness work that we do much like an insurance salesman. Nobody wants to buy insurance. They don't want to pay for it. They don't see the need for it until they have an accident. Then they wish they had it. So same thing for us. We say, these are all the preparedness things that we urge you to do. This is likely going to be a thing that you're going to have to deal with. And if they don't take those measures, they wish they would have after it occurs, right? So really just trying to communicate that.
Yeah. And then I guess after responding, how involved are you guys post kind of disaster? Like once, say, a fire has actually actively been managed, dealing with kind of like the repercussions and aftermath of that disaster and like helping the community. How long do you guys usually stay down there? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think you're on post.
Yeah, so there is a defined kind of period for us where we say we really want to be involved in the response phase of the disaster. So it'll roll through phases and transition, as you mentioned, from response to recovery. Mm-hmm. And we do need to kind of delineate that line of where can we transition out. That decision and deciding of whether we as CVET need to be there or not is going to be a joint conversation, not only between our team, but between the animal services and the county members of that government to say, how do you feel as a community? Can you take this back on your own? Do you feel like you're kind of back on your feet? And in addition to that, we have accessible veterinary care programs in the One Health Institute, and really partnering with them as that program grows to say, can we do a partnership transition between CVET being here during a response? We've made these connections, these relationships, and hand that baton off to the accessible veterinary care group to help with some of the recovery care. Okay. And the really important thing for us is we will be there for as long as needed, as long as the jurisdiction is asking us to be there. Mm-hmm. But we also need to keep in mind that the longer that we're there, the longer we are not available to go somewhere else, right? So as soon as we can make that transition, and also to help that community get back on their feet, that veterinary practice to get functioning again, we really want them to be able to take it back into their hands for their sake, as well as allowing us to prepare for the next disaster that comes.
Yeah. Do you find that like community veterinarians usually get involved with you guys if you do, or if you are asked to respond? Do you have kind of the community veterinarians reaching out, helping?
Yeah, and that's a big part of our outreach campaign. And one thing that we push for preparedness for veterinary professionals, we encourage folks to sign up with the CVET program. Right. It's free to join. We have free online training. And what we can really do is provide that supplemental training. Mm-hmm. You already know how to be a veterinarian, but let's talk about how you can apply those skills during a disaster response and integrate appropriately. Because I think the messaging that I've heard, just for the last 3 years, talking to lots of veterinarians across the state, is whether they want to or not, you'll be brought into a disaster scenario if you're a local clinic and there's impacted animals. And so it's really nice to just go ahead and kind of in advance, kind of work through what that's going to look like, give them some heads up, but also give them some tools and skills of how to properly integrate and to respond, hopefully with us if we come. But even if we're not mobilized, they can still do some things at a local level to help with their community.
That's very cool. I think that kind of went into our last question for you, but just kind of what are your recommendations for veterinarians or practitioners that kind of want to get involved in emergency situations and kind of I think a lot of times we do get looked to for advice in like situations like that, even if maybe we're not necessarily the most I guess like educated on that matter, but I think we're still kind of looked to for that. And so is it just taking use of that program that you guys offer, getting prepared pre anything happening?
It's always, that's one thing I'll say, shameless plug, cvetucdavis.org. Please head to the website. You'll see a banner, join as a volunteer responder. If you're a vet professional, even a support role, we'd love to have you join us. We have lots of different opportunities to help during disasters. But in addition to being an active vet professional that volunteers with us, there's even some additional things. And maybe Dr. Patterson, you can talk about the affiliate hospital.
Yeah, so in addition to being an individual responder, and we do have some training materials on there, and even inclusive of that materials is stuff like how do you prepare your clinic, how do you prepare your clients, how do you prepare yourself. So great information in there. In addition to that, we also have an affiliate hospital partnership program where we reach out to clinics across the state to say, if a disaster were to impact your area, would you like to partner with us in the event that we are deployed? We did that with a hospital during the park fire this last summer that we responded, and worked really nicely to have this partnership with them. And it allows that hospital to still manage their day-to-day operations, focus on what they do on a daily basis, but still be a part and help their community, but don't feel like they have to take the entire burden of dealing with this disaster on their own. So the partnership between the two, the hospital and CVET, ends up working out really nicely.
That's cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. We really liked having you here, and we hope you guys all enjoyed listening. And check out cvet.org.
CVETUCDavis.org.
cvetucdavis.org. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. We are